All right, today we've got Jason Kirk and Justin Hunter with us, two good friends of the podcast, and we're gonna do a underrated solid state fantasy draft. That's a mouthful, but this is gonna be a fantasy draft of bands from the solid state world that we think are underrated. Okay, so we're gonna get into all the rules and how we're gonna do this draft, and then we're gonna obviously get into the draft itself, and hopefully there's good debating and arguing, as good music nerds should be doing. But before we get into all of that, both Justin and Jason have some fun things to plug that I feel like you all should know about. So, Justin, let's start off with you first. Obviously, you're an incredible photographer. You've been at Furnace Fest I think every year since the sort of resurrection of Furnace Fest, right?
Definitely, yeah.
So, I mean, if you're a Furnace Fest goer, you probably have seen Justin up front, hanging out, doing his thing. Justin, what do you want to like kind of plug in terms of like maybe the photography business, or maybe got some other things, maybe you got
Yeah,
cigars to
so
plug. I don't know, but what do
totally,
you
yeah.
want to tell the people?
So I shoot concerts. My name is Justin Hunter, aka the Owl. So you can find me on Instagram. Owl King Photography is on my concert portraiture, and then also I like to smoke cigars. So you probably saw me smoking a cigar at Furnace Fest, shooting a band, putting the cigar down, running back, shooting the band, lighting the cigar back up, and I shoot for about 30 different cigar brands. I just had one of my shots be in an international magazine. It's a full page ad, which is super
Damn.
crazy. So yeah, I think it's supposed to be seen by about 5 million people. So I'm just,
Whoa.
yeah, it's super crazy. It's insane. Like I work for a local magazine out here in rural Alabama. I live in Jasper. If you ever heard of Jasper, come see me. We can smoke a cigar together, hang out. I might take your picture. But yeah, that's what I do. I've shot Furnace Fest the last couple of years, and this kind of resurrection of it. I was too little to go to the original Furnace Fest. My mom definitely would not allow me or taking me to Furnace Fest, the original one. But the last couple of years, I've been blessed to be able to shoot it. Shout out to Johnny Grimes and those guys. But yeah, I've shot thousands of hundreds of bands now because of Furnace Fest. It's just a ton of work, and it's so fun. There's no other festival like it, and I'm sad that it's kind of transitioning to something new. So
Right.
I don't know
As a photographer, what's like the biggest difference between shooting or like shooting a sort of scene or whatever, however you would call it, for cigars versus like shooting a show? Like, obviously there's going to be like skills and like just techniques and everything that are probably going to transfer for both. But what's like the biggest difference between like shooting a cigar ad versus shooting a concert where you've got people diving
Yeah,
over you?
yeah. Besides, like almost getting like your face kicked in, that's for the big one. It's definitely that, but also like the control of the scene, like being able to capture a moment, something really sweet. But other than that, it's the same skills. You know, the same skills that go into shooting an ad goes into shooting like a band. It's like you want to be capture the right moment. For me, it's always finding the right moment and being able to convey that to whether it be a band where they repost your image or say being able to give your image to like a cigar brand. Hey, I shot your stuff. This is what it looks like. And the biggest thing is I make sure that it's sharp. I can't stand this new trend of blurry images. I'm not a fan
Ah,
of it at all. No one's tack sharp. I'm trying to keep it all tack sharp as much as I can.
Love that. What's like what band would you say is probably your favorite? Just one image, your favorite image that you've taken. What is that band?
Oh, okay. My one of my absolute favorite images is of the Death Heaven set.
mm.
Oh,
Dude,
interesting.
that Death Heaven set. So I've got some crazy like black and whites of their vocalist, and he's just like teasing, snarling, and he had like like he was the most interesting person I've ever photographed. But yeah, that was probably one of my absolute favorites. And then I've got a shot, if we want to keep it in the solid state world, of of Dan from Zayo. Like the first year,
Oh
Mm.
yeah.
he has like the lights all behind him. It's
Yeah.
just
Was he looking like a demon? Because he sounds
yeah,
like that sometimes.
yeah,
He's
he
a
has like the
demon.
Avenged Sevenfold like wings on, and there's just like,
I love it, man.
dude, yeah.
That's so cool.
So that's probably one of my absolute favorite shots to get to shoot them. But Furnace Fest is low key like a solid state festival most years, so you can just check off solid state bands.
True.
That's right. That's right.
Hey,
Well, that's why we wanted to get you on.
one last question before we move on to Jason here. If you had one opportunity to photograph one scene, one band, one whatever it is that's like your pet project, the thing that you've always wanted to get your hands on, or the scene to like have in front of you to be able to photograph. What is it?
One scene in front of me that's like music related.
It doesn't have to be music related.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
That's a vast question, man. If I would love to be able to do promo shots for Zayo. If I could get Zayo, Dan, and Jess and those boys in front of me just to do like a full promo set for them. That's like childhood, like just crying. I probably cry the whole time.
Maybe we can try to get you hooked up here afterwards.
Yeah.
There we go.
That'd be cool. Remind
us. Jason, let's introduce you now. You've got a book out now, but more so than that, like you're also like one of my favorite Twitter follows ever. I can't believe we haven't been connected earlier. I feel like it's been maybe just over a year now since we've been connected, or maybe, I don't know, 2 years. I have no idea at this point, but like you seem like somebody who I should have known my whole life and just have now only been knowing about for the last like year or so. But you're just so cool. You're so funny. I'm just like, I'm so upset that I haven't known you longer in my life. Like that's my one, there's many regrets I have in my life. I'm adding the fact that I haven't known Jason Kirk longer as one of my regrets.
I think he's going to propose next.
Yeah, let's go. That's fine. That's fine. we got a lot of catching up to do. That's one way to do it.
Right.
So yeah, got a book out. The list of people who say it's good does include Mason. Mason's name is in there next to words that he wrote, so he's on record as saying it's good. If he decides in the future it's bad, it's too bad. I already got his words.
That's right.
It's also been positively reviewed by Publishers Weekly and Kirkus Reviews and Independent Book Review and things of that nature. But Mason, that was the big one.
That's right.
I would say it's called Hell Is a World Without You. I would say it is unbelievably relevant to anyone who listens to this podcast and who likes this music world. So many of the bands that you guys talk about and have talked to references to, but like use their song titles as chapter titles. Like there's Norma Jean in there. There's Zayo. You mentioned Zayo. Zayo is my favorite band ever. Actually, I wrote it down. The bands that are mentioned most frequently, all of these are like tied for second place. All right. Amy Grant, Carmen, DC Talk, Further Seems Forever, Kirk Franklin, Outkast, they're the oddball here, Reliant K, Rich Mullins, Switchfoot, and Zayo. Number 1, Five Iron Frenzy, who they dominate the rankings because my favorite character, her screen name in the book, I have lots of like AIM conversations, just dated myself by saying AIM, but her screen name is One Girl Army, a Five Iron Frenzy song. So if you grew up evangelical and you are less evangelical these days, I'm telling you, this is the book for you. In addition, all proceeds that are received by February 12th are going straight to the Trevor Project. We have already donated $39,000 and looking to make that number bigger.
Sweet. What is the Trevor Project? I'm sorry, I'm ignorant here.
The Trevor Project is a charity devoted to reducing self-harm among LGBTQ youth.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Fantastic.
I like that.
They do incredible work. And the fact that I just saw you like had posted like your recent like donation or whatever, and I'm like, oh my God, like that's so much money that you've already been able to donate. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable how well received the book has been, and it's kind of unbelievable also the fact that like you were even willing to ask some like who gives a shit person like me to like, hey, I like you enough to put your name in my book and ask you to write words about it. Like it was just like cool moment for me.
Nah, I mean, a lot of people care what you have to say and care what you think, and I need those people on board.
Well, I am fully on board with anything that Jason Kirk's going to be involved in. The funny thing here is, Jason, is the fact that obviously you've got this great like novel. It's so funny. It's really, really relevant to obviously a lot of the listeners of this podcast, but also like that's not your main gig. Like people know you also because you're
Charlie Kirk's brother.
Oh God, yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
Really, really well. Me and my very close brother, Charlie.
I didn't even think about that. But for people that don't know, you're a sports writer, and specifically college sports. I don't know if you want to say anything more about like what you do in that world or not, but I still remember like one time I'm like, who is this Jason Kirk guy? And I looked you up and I saw New York Times next to your name, and I'm like, who the fuck is this?
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense that I work for the New York Times Company. I went to a college nobody's ever heard of. We're FCS. No offense to FCS. Mason, I know you're an FCS guy. South Dakota State, best FCS team ever. But yeah,
Go
I've been
Jacks.
very oh, we have multiple Jacks. Okay, all right.
Yeah, Cullen was a thrower for the Jacks.
Yeah.
Okay, I forgot about that part. I remember Mason mentioned that. But yeah, I've been blessed to have a career in college sports. I work for The Athletic. I'm the newsletters editor there, which means I get to work with a lot of really good writers: Zach Harper, Chris Branch, Levi Weaver, Jana Bardell, just a bunch of writers covering really great sports. And I have a sports podcast called The Shutdown Fullcast with Spencer Hall, Ryan Nanny, and Holly Anderson. We usually cover college football, but kind of not. And I have a podcast with my wife called the Vacation Bible School Podcast. It's not about sports; it's about the Bible.
Yeah.
Jason, do you ever work with David Lombardi by any chance? Because I know he writes for The Athletic.
It's been a long time, but I'm pretty sure that we had some sort of an encounter at some point.
Okay. Anyway, I'm a big 49ers fan, and all his stuff is on Athletic, and I was like, I know a guy at The Athletic now. Maybe they know each other. But anyway.
You know Spencer Hall? I listen to him all the time on podcasts. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's wild.
That's his man.
That's my guy.
That's insane. That's insane.
Also, Justin, are you've got to be Roll Tide, right? You're not a Tigers
right.
fan, right?
Die in the wool. No, it's
Ooh.
I bleed crimson. Like
Hell yeah. Okay.
we had, there was definitely rituals performed in front of, Nick Saban's, statue, with the oatmeal cream pies, the Coke out there.
That's right.
Cheers. It was like this side, like I was sitting in the cigar lounge.
It's like when a saint dies.
Oh, it was like people were like, this for real? Like comes on the ticker, like Paul Feinbaum. Lo and behold, Nick Saban's retiring. Everyone's just checking the phone. It can't be.
It's like, guys, he's still alive. He didn't die.
But Alabama football isn't. So
he went to be with the good Lord in our eyes. Like he's gone. Like he's just went away.
It's funny because there's a really popular thrower for the track team at Alabama, and she's a relatively good looking gal, and she's posting some thirst traps on Instagram, and the comment section is the funniest thing you've ever seen because it's all Nick Saban related, the entire thing. Laughed my ass off at that one.
Oh my god!
Roll Tide.
Yeah, Roll Tide.
All right, so let's get into the draft. So this is how it's going to work. Obviously, it's underrated solid state bands. So you might be wondering, like, what does underrated mean in this solid state world? So that is actually up to the person drafting. We have to make an argument. Hey, this band is underrated because of this reason. Maybe it's because they didn't sell a lot of records, but you thought they were really good. Maybe you thought, okay, even if they sold like a decent amount of records, they should have been way bigger within the broader metal or hardcore scene, whatever it might be. But we have to make that argument of why they're underrated. You also might be wondering, like, what qualifies as a solid state band? I think for us, it really just means they released one album on solid state. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that they've had to have like all of their albums on solid state. Just as long as they've released one album on solid state, they qualify as a solid state band. The other thing is we're going to break this down.
It has to be a full album, correct? It can't be an EP. Because if we're including EPs, my list changes big time.
Oh.
So I think we need to keep it at albums specifically, LPs, full LPs.
Okay, let's go LP, just one LP.
Yeah.
At least one LP. It sort of reminds me of when we did our Tooth and Nail one. We could technically have added POD to that, and it's like they released like a 3-song EP or something. It's like, does that qualify as a Tooth and Nail band then? Not really. So, all right, one full-length album on solid state at some point in their career. That's what qualifies as a solid state band. The other thing is we're going to break this down by eras. Now, you may disagree with me on these eras. That's totally fine. But we're going to break it down to the beginning of the solid state years, which I think is like 95 or 96. I forget exactly when solid state, the imprint started. but we're going to start with that to 2003. So sort of think of it as the beginning years, the few years, maybe what is it, about 7 years or so that Solid State started as a record label, obviously as an imprint of Tooth and Nail. Then we're going to get what we considered like the golden years of Solid State. So that's going to be a different round. That's going to be a different category. So the golden years, 2004 to 2013 is kind of where we're putting that estimate. Then we're going to go the kind of more current era of Solid State, and that is 2014 to now. So we're going to break it down to those 3 categories. So one round is going to be the beginning years. Second round is going to be the golden years. And then the third round is going to be the current years, or the most recent years of Solid State. And then we're actually going to do a fourth round, which is a wild card of any one of those eras. Okay. So we're going to have 4 rounds of 4 different picks of each of us. So 16 total picks. And we'd love to know from you listeners who you think has the best team assembled, right? Like that's what it comes down to, is we're going to make our arguments for why we picked who we pick. And then at the end, we're going to try to figure out who had the best team in total. So that's what we're going to go with. Cullen, is there anything else in terms of rules or stipulations or regulations that we need to talk about?
I think the only other rule that you should probably go by is, if you're going to have a definition of what is underrated to yourself, it has to be relatively consistent throughout your argument for all of your bands. So don't be like, well, they're really underrated for the label, and then this one's underrated for like pop music in general or whatever. So try to keep it consistent, so that otherwise the arguments are just going to get insane.
Cullen,
yeah. Are we ready to pick names here?
Let's pick names. Let's see
right.
where our draft order is going to be.
All right, here we go. I'm spinning the wheel.
The wheel of death. What do you got,
Mason?
Pat,
you are first.
Oh, fuck. Okay. So we are going to also, I didn't tell you guys this, but we're going to do it snake draft. So I'm first round, and I'll be last in the second round, if that makes sense.
Next is me.
Oh,
what the hell?
Home cooking.
This is rigged.
I have never gotten the first pick. I'm pretty sure Mason's gotten the first pick every single time, or maybe every other time that we've done
remember
these.
That.
Next is Jason.
Nice.
And then Justin will be last. Which means you will go twice at the end.
Oh,
correct.
Perfect. Good deal. All
right. That is true.
Let's get rock and rolling then. Mason, you're first. 95-ish to 03.
All right, I'm on the clock. God, there's so many really good bands in this era that I think don't get a lot of respect. But this is a band that I think ended up becoming very influential in the Solid State world, and actually ended up playing. Sorry, there's so many bands. Now I'm rethinking my pick.
You want to trade down in the draft?
That is
to trade down. God, yeah,
that would be nice.
This is the Vikings missing their pick. All this.
That's right.
Oh man.
Yeah. Who wants to trade up for Trey Lance right now?
Where's Troy Williamson?
Oh God. You know how that also, you know how there was like this like Twitter thing the other day, Jason, of like name a random receiver. Troy Williamson would have been a great one. I didn't even think of that. All right, I've just made my decision. This is a band that eventually became a very not underrated Solid State band, but they were a band before the band that became a very non-underrated Solid State band. But they actually just recently played at Furnace Fest. I think because they had
Can you
just
say the
released
damn band name? Let's go.
Let me give the people what they're waiting for. You know,
they're waiting to hear the name of the band.
I like the foreplay of it. It's great. Give me a second.
Okay, well, you've gotten seconds. Let's go.
True Love is waiting.
That's right. I guess.
So, all right. Anyway, this band, I think, is just severely underrated, not just in the Tooth and Nail scene and Solid State scene, but they just were so inventive at their time. But that band is Training for Utopia.
Ooh.
Obviously, eventually, Ryan Clark and Don Clark eventually start Demon Hunter, which obviously is not an underrated solid state band. They are very appropriately rated. We'll put it that way. But I think a Training for Utopia was so interesting. They were doing really just, kind of that new metal sound, but they had like this really interesting hardcore sound and metalcore sound. They were really, really well, just a fascinating band. And yeah, they probably were a little too heavy for the average listener, and that's probably why like Demon Hunter eventually kind of went their route and got really big. But yeah, I think Training for Utopia is legit, and I think they qualify for sure as underrated.
I would say obviously a great band.
For sure.
I love them. I don't know if they are underrated necessarily. I think they're rated exactly where they should be, solely for the fact that those recordings are not very, let's say, clear. It's a little too DIY sounding, even though it wasn't DIY. And I'm also going to say that, judging by the crowds at Furnace Fest, I think that they were rated just how they should have been. Underrated says like, hey, maybe they can't quite fill the shed at Furnace Fest.
I wonder how much of that is like their lasting staying power. How much of that is because of
I think big time.
Yeah, I feel like they're underrated, like on their own. Like Train for Utopia on its own is underrated. But Ryan Clark, the Clark brothers, like they are just like not underrated. So
Well, good thing I didn't pick the Clark brothers.
Well, you kind of did.
Which sounds like a gospel trio. The thing I'll say about TFU is when they came out, they were the Scare Your Parents band that I was allowed to listen to, which is paradoxical, granted. But like I'm probably a bit older than y'all, but when this band came out, it was like, oh man, I got something that can annoy old people now, because like they're used to living sacrifice now. They can handle, most of this stuff. But TFU's first album, the second one was a bit more rock and roll. The first album was like, these guys are a little bit unhinged for Christians.
Dude, I dig that. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They were kind of like the Soft Rebellion band. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heck, then have that great Noise album. It's more like a noise. It's not even metal. It's more like that noise heavy kind of rock album. That's really good. So
yeah, 100%.
So anyway, that's my pick. Number
All
one
right.
pick.
It's an interesting first pick, Mason. I think it's a strong one. It's a good roster pick. I don't know if they're necessarily underrated. My first band, 95-ish to 03. I'm going to go with a little known band from Oklahoma City called Still Breathing. They had a single LP. And this band was of its time and also ahead of its time at the same time. You had a dynamic female vocalist who, I will be honest, the first couple times I listened to this band, thinking back, I did not know she was a woman. I was terrified of her screams and her singing voice. There's a couple songs like I can't remember the name. It was like just one kiss or something like that. It's like a heavier version of Deftones. And really? It's creepy, like with like this like whispery, almost back of your throat kind of singing, and then it just comes in with the heaviest screams you can possibly imagine. Super dynamic album, great songwriting. The girl's name, I think her name is Daisy. Yeah,
just goes by Daisy. I love that it's like Beyonce, but just like Daisy.
Yeah,
from a band called Still Breathing.
Yeah. The other thing I like about them is that you don't see a lot of female vocalists in the metalcore genre in the early 2000s. That is very, very uncommon. And one that holds her own like she does is, I would say, almost unheard of in the entire music scene, in terms of the heavy music scene, I should say. At that time. Yeah. Today, I mean, we have plenty of trailblazers there, but She's kind of an enigma, a thought unto her own. I think when it comes to truly being underrated, she is underrated. That band, Still Breathing, is still very underrated.
Yeah, I don't think there's any debate here. This is truly an underrated band because of the fact that it's like one album. Not many people ever talk about it.
Yeah.
There's no debating here that it's underrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I considered this band, and I didn't know that their singer's a woman.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's
So-
what I'm talking about. She almost sounds like a deathcore singer, or like a doomcore singer. Like it's wild. So
And
good.
we especially had so very few female vocalists to listen to in the Christian world. Like it was even less than
Yeah.
Right.
than secular loud music at large. It was like Flyleaf. Not that they were that extreme, and that's
right.
pretty close
Oh.
to it.
Yeah, pretty much. I
Evanescence.
literally can't think
well,
of
you know,
another.
Evanescence.
Evanescence,
They were
yeah.
Christians for,
Yeah.
for hot
Yeah,
minute,
yeah,
but-
Yeah, but she doesn't really scream. I mean,
Mhm.
she's a great singer, but
Yeah, that's true.
I love it. All right, next is Jason.
So I decided that my criteria that I would attempt to go by would be current Spotify listens. So we can say like
Oh, okay.
are lots and
Oh.
lots of people still into this band. So this band, they're floating at 360 per month. This is
Oh
a
my-
band that more people need to get out there and catch up on. From Dallas, Texas, Society's Finest, one solid state album, and then they did a couple of others. And it all holds up. It's all pretty basic metalcore, nothing too crazy going on. Little melody, little creativity. But like two things about this band. One, I remember when they came, like their first year, like Cornerstone. It was like me and the homies, we show up. We're like, what are the bands we're most excited to see? Zayo, of course. The ones that were really big. This was our pick. This is next. This is our rookie of the year pick, right? Like we thought this band was gonna be huge. This was before Norma Jean was Norma Jean. This was before Under Oath was the thing we think of as Under Oath. Under Oath was still in their first era. So it was kind of like, who's gonna be the band in this scene? This is the one we would have bet on. Only one album. Tons of talent went through this band. They had members. One of their singer went on to be the front man for Zayo for a while. They had a member from Sixpence None the Richer was in the band at one point.
What?
Yes, that guy
Wow.
from As I Lay Dying was in the band, but he just played guitar. Don't blame Society's Finest for him. But like
Yeah,
the list of talent, this
Society's
band only
worse.
had one solid state album and only a couple other albums, and no one listens to anymore. It was insane. But yeah, they're one album that I ever really paid attention to. It still holds up, so I feel good
That's
about that.
Damn.
I'll be honest, I've not listened to Society's Finest. So that's definitely going to be underrated
Yeah.
for you. It's yet to be determined for me.
Also, I can't believe this is a band that, at least in their like first iteration, they were only around for like 5 or 4 years, and they had on their Wikipedia. It looks like they have like almost at least 20 people that have been in the band.
Yeah,
I mean, they were just in constant
That's like a
rotation.
tumultuous band, just like always, just someone leaving. Like it was like you playing guitar
It
this
was
week?
like,
Nah, man,
like
I'm
the
out.
way
I'm
people
leaving.
talk about some of these bands that have shifting memberships, this was that crunched into half a decade.
It's like Communist Society's Finest. It's just a communal band.
You play guitar.
It's literally
you
a
play this week.
society
Oh my
is what
gosh.
it is.
It is a
Just
society.
pulling people left and right.
They should have a city government.
Well,
Yeah,
in
I'll be
Texas,
honest.
so-
I've never heard of this band. I couldn't tell you anything about it, but because of that, like truly at least fits underrated. Whether they're good or not,
Brock.
that's up to that's up to debate. The fact that you obviously like you grew up in the world where it was like early solid state stuff. The fact that like Under Oath was coming up and some of those other bands were coming up, and you thought that this would be the band that broke out, that's pretty impressive to me.
Yeah, they didn't, but you can't nail all your picks.
They have kind of a faulty foundation with so many like so many member changes.
All right,
Ugh.
Justin, let's hear it. Last
Whoa.
pick of the first
Last
round for
pick.
the early era of solid
So
state records.
early era, since you pretty much stole Training for Utopia from me, I was like, And I shot them live. Like I could shoot that band. He took it. I was like, oh, I already knew the one you're going for. So I had to do a little shifting around. I went with NIV, no innocent victims. So
Oh,
their last record kind of falls in the first era of solid, of what we're talking about, 2003. And I actually remember looking in H&M magazine in like the Christian bookstore and seeing "Suffering No Loss," "Suffering the Loss" in a magazine. I was like, oh, I love that. The hands that are flaming, the eye, and then lo and behold, NIV, they disband, but their vocalist is probably one of the dopest vocals live. Great front man. Y'all might know him. He plays in Comeback Kid.
yeah.
Andrew from Comeback Kid. So he was the original vocalist in No Innocent Victim. And for me, No Innocent Victim's kind of underrated. They kind of disband in that mid-era. They didn't play for a long time. But if you want just classic hardcore music, there's nothing kind of innovative, but just good, solid hardcore. That's my band. So as a hardcore, youth group kid, seeing that ad kind of brought back, oh, I've seen them, and it's fun. So it's, they'll never play again, but they're underrated because there's no reunion. Wait, no, they're supposed to play, but they didn't play.
They were supposed to play? Like, was this
Yeah.
like what at Furnace
2022.
Fest?
They're
Oh,
supposed to
dang.
play it.
So at
You
that
end up
point, they would
playing?
have become ineligible for this draft.
Right.
So
Yep.
that's why they didn't play then.
They knew.
Like, we have to win this bitch.
Justin needs a good pick, so there we go.
Something really strange about No Innocent Victim. I was at my local park one day in Watertown, South Dakota, and I was
Which
playing
park?
playing at the playground, Highland Park, and I found a button, like a pin-on button that said "No Innocent Victim" on it, and I was like, "This is cool," and I kept it. It's somewhere in one of these boxes to the left of me. I'll find it, and I'll see if I can send
Do
a
you
photo.
ever
over
get
to
rid of
guys.
anything?
No, I don't. I also have a Comeback Kid button that I stole from my sister. So
Yo,
yeah,
do
Damn.
bands still do buttons? Is buttons a thing or is that just out with the arrows? Like, I don't think people do buttons anymore.
yeah, they don't
That
really
used to
do
be a
them.
big
They
thing.
should.
This
They're a
be
lot.
huge. You go to a merch table, there's buttons everywhere. For
Yeah,
$1, like 50 cents.
They don't
yeah.
do stickers anymore either.
I think it's because there's not enough meat on the bone to make any money. You know.
That is
If
true.
you're spending $40 on a shirt, you can't vouch out the other dollar for a button.
I'll say NIV. I think that they're one where the eras is interesting because these days, I would say like pretty off the radar. Like at the time, they were like the hardcore band in this scene. But like doing this draft now, it's like yeah, they're mostly forgotten. So let's count them.
Yeah, I think they might have had like if I was listening to them on Spotify today just to make sure I was tuned in. I think it's around like 2,000 or less like listens. Like they used to be huge, but now like no one knows who they are.
Right. I mean, they were touring with Terror, Hatebreed, Madball, POD. Like they were touring with really, really big bands, and obviously they probably weren't like the headliners for those types of tours. But the fact that they were even in the conversation, like people that were listening to POD would also be listening to No Innocent Victim is probably. I mean, they clearly had some traction going on. Yeah, they clearly had something going on.
Yeah.
So. Great pick. I mean, certainly underrated, but also like one of those bands that people really, really respect, especially if you're in the hardcore scene. Totally get it.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll also say that for a first round, that was those are some heavy hitters, I think.
Yeah.
Heavy hitters for underrated bands, right?
Right.
All right, Justin, it's back to you already.
Back to me. Okay.
This is for 2004 through 2013.
So because I'm just a Ryan Clark disciple, he's just probably my favorite vocalist. I'm gonna go with Focal Point. So
Right.
yeah, so that's like the band that he's in before he's in Training for Utopia. So it's like, for me, like I'm just a Ryan Clark fiend. So anything that he does, regardless of what it is, I'm gonna pick it. So I listened through him today, and maybe not my favorite, but I'm in love with Ryan Clark. So I'm gonna, as much Ryan Clark I can get on my list. For me, it would have been Train for Utopia, then Focal Point. But because Mason, but they're just underrated. I listened to their album today. I loved it.
So we're going 2000. We're doing 2004 to 2013 now.
Oh,
we're We're in the golden age
Oh, Golden
of
Age, dude,
solid
give
state.
me. Okay, then if that's it, then it's the famine.
Oh,
Oh,
My bad.
I knew Cullen was gonna
you
pick
stole
them.
it from me.
Yeah, it's a dude. I felt in so as a southerner that southern metal, that kind of gritty, groovy,
Mm-hmm.
just brutal first album. Like I remember being in was that a junior or so? No, it was a junior high school. Like walking around like Disney World with the famine shirt, and I can't tell you how many times I've spun that record. So for me, it's just malicious, and they didn't go anywhere. Like they had this big falling out
Yeah.
about them actually loving Jesus. And they were just then they released one more album and that was it. And I was like, I was so wanting more famine, but it became a famine, became scarce, and they were out of there. So
Yeah. Dude, I have to 100% agree with you. That song Consume, Devour, Repeat
oh my
off
gosh,
of that first
dude,
album
the
is
South
one of the heaviest albums of Solid
will,
or one of the heaviest songs of Solid
the
State.
South will rise again, dude.
Oh yeah, dude, for sure.
Those Alabama songs.
Yes. I will also say that their album cover for Architects of Guilt is easily in my top 5 favorite album covers of all time. I think that is so cool the way that they did that. So if you haven't seen it, go look at it right now.
Did you watch the music video?
It's hard to believe that they were
Well-
actually a Christian band with that album cover.
Well, I don't think they really were come the second.
But-
No,
album.
they were not.
But the
That's-
fact that they
Or
were
even
even
the
on a
first
label
album.
like that, though, with that album cover,
Yeah.
That was the
Well, I think that they were kind of one of those bands that they were kind of like He Is Legend, where they were like, we've never said we're Christian, we're not really Christian. And then what ended up happening was they were kind of done disservice by the Solid State label, not necessarily intentionally, but by the fans, because the fans kind of picked up on the fact that, hey, you're not claiming yourself to be Christian, so therefore we're not going to listen to your album.
yeah.
That's kind of my take on it, but
Mhm.
that's just me.
Yeah, that was the big thing with that one. This was when people found out they weren't technically a Christian band, and they were like, "Well,
See ya.
wash their hands of them."
Yeah.
And we never got a third
Yeah.
album. I was just like, "Come on, guys, just one more for the people."
Yeah, dude,
great pick.
it sucks. It's a great pick. I think you're dead on with that being underrated for sure.
All right, Jason, your golden age era round. What's your pick?
So this one was tough for a couple reasons. One being like there's so many hits in this decade.
Yeah.
So it's like
Right.
every band is like, well, they're not underrated. They're not underrated. So I decided to stick with the same rule. And Colin, I'm glad you mentioned keep the rule consistent because I decided to stick to one album bands only.
Oh
Oh,
wow!
So that narrowed it down quite a
I
bit
hope you
for
don't
this
steal
one.
mine.
My gosh.
And I'm gonna go with not my favorites, not really even my favorite genre, but I listened back to it today and it was fine. Gwen Stacy is what we're going with.
Oh,
Sure.
They're not
Sure.
underrated. Not when they were around.
I know. So that's the thing is like I was looking on Spotify to try to find a band in this decade that's like underappreciated, and they're one of the lowest from Solid State's roster
Yeah.
in
Oh,
this
for
period.
real?
Yeah, probably
Oh,
because
yeah.
there's only one album, only one Solid State album. But yeah, it's this was a hard decade to actually find something that I could even talk myself into being underrated. I think just the fact that if they'd stuck around, they would be huge.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because they only had one album, they could only be rated so highly.
Right.
Is the argument
Right.
I'm giving myself. That and the
That's-
other
yeah.
thing is this decade was like when I was like completely paying zero attention to Christian and Christian adjacent music. Like to use the
what?
to use the terminology, this was like the exact
Lost
middle
years.
of my deconstruction phase, so to speak. It was like I'm good with Zayo, and that's it. I don't want any of this other stuff. So like a lot of this has been coming back around, and like, okay, here's what I missed out on during this decade, right?
Sure.
But yeah, and it was stuff like
I'm gonna have an argument against you, and I'm gonna say that Gwen Stacy. Here's the thing about Gwen Stacy. Everybody I knew that listened to Solid State had the Gwen Stacy album.
Yep.
But no one said it was a good album. So, and I'm not trying to talk trash or anything like that. You know, I know that those guys probably worked hard on it, but it's just not very good, in my opinion. I think it's trying too hard in so many ways, and that it was really kind of a marketing genius kind of thing that everyone who listened to Solid State bought that album. Or maybe we were all just too young and didn't quite understand what good music was, but that album is just not good. I've tried so many times to try to like see what it is about that album. And I don't think it's underrated because I don't think it's very good.
Yeah. So they had the two albums. One of them is straight up
the
bad,
two albums,
and then one on Solid State is like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I mean,
there's a couple serviceable songs, and that's about it.
Yeah, like outside of the context of needing a pick, I wouldn't stump all that hard for it.
But good
I
call.
mean, I don't really have any. Yeah, I didn't particularly like them as a band, but I do think they qualify as an underrated band. Whether you think they're good or not, that's up to everybody to figure out for themselves. I didn't really particularly like them, but they certainly, I think, are underrated in the sense that like not a lot of people listen to them in comparison to their contemporaries.
Yeah. All right. My pick. This one's actually one of my favorite bands that I like to claim as one of my favorite underrated bands. And this is for any genre or for any label or artist or whatever. The Ascendicate.
Oh,
I don't know if any of you guys listen to this band, but this band went so hard on the verses and went so poppy on all the choruses, and had like these like cool like little interludes and everything like that. And they were great songwriters. They were kind of like a super group of sorts. They had one album, and I think they formed in like 2000, but their album came out in 2008, and then they didn't do anything else ever again. It's such a weird anomaly. The fact that this band could write so many good songs, the entire album is great through and through, and it's completely lost to time. It got no press push from Solid State or anything. It was just like, here's an album, all right, next one. So I don't know. I don't know why that band didn't have more following.
I still remember around the time that it would have come out. I remember Cullen, you were like, these guys are legit, and it had just so many different kind of genres going on with it. It was fascinating. It is kind of unbelievable that it just didn't get the traction that I think you're probably right that it should have deserved. They're not like, they certainly wouldn't be like one of my favorites or anything, but the fact that they didn't get as much traction, given the fact that like so much of that sound at that time was also like really well liked, it's just hard to believe that they like didn't quite ride that wave in the way that a lot of other bands, even from Solid State, were riding it.
Yeah.
No, I remember that band coming out, and then I remember them breaking up and their guitarist going to Demon Hunter. I was like, oh, this is a cool band. And I was like, oh, now he's in Demon Hunter. I was like, that was a weird, like, I just remember seeing them and like, oh, Demon Hunter's got a new guitar player. That's that guy from the Syndicate. I should go check them out. So, and that was just all that was that. So,
yeah, it was a weird anomaly kind of situation there. I don't know. Great band though. They deserve more.
One thing I find interesting so far is none of us have really picked any bands that we would think are like debatable to be a part of a different scene or a different era. So like, there's some bands where like maybe they could cross over from one era or the other, and then you'd have to make the argument that no, they actually should be in this era. It doesn't, like, it seems like all the bands that we picked so far have been cleanly in one era or not.
Well, it helps because most of them have been one album wonder.
Yeah.
Most of them. Yeah.
Two albums.
Like the ones that are tough,
two
it's
bangers.
like Norma Jean is tough because they were rated highly enough to make numerous albums. But
yeah, they would be probably one of the few that would be them and maybe Under Oath would be able to be a part of every single era. Like that there might be only a couple of those bands, Norma Jean being one, and
Yeah,
obviously
Zayo.
Underoath.
Zayo doesn't win because they went to Ferret. Like, I think
Yeah, true.
so. Like,
True. Yeah, they didn't stay with
no,
Solid
no.
State.
So
I get what you mean.
they don't count beyond like.
Right. But I think like Norma Jean and Underoath, I think at least had an album in each one of these eras.
I know Norma
Yeah.
Jean did. Yeah.
Certainly Norma Jean. I
Does
think even Underoath might have.
I think Underoath did as well.
Extol does.
Extol. Yeah, that's a good point.
That is true. Yep. So,
Yeah.
is it my turn?
It is.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a band that I also think is really underrated, although maybe in comparison to some of your guys' picks, they might have like more Spotify listeners. But it's also like important to like realize that this is the band that literally was like opening for Underoath and Norma Jean and some of these like really, really big bands at the time. And to me, they had a sound that would have taken them to the lengths, the kind of heights of Devil Wears Prada and Attack Attack and a lot of the big metalcore that was coming out at that time. But for some reason, this band just didn't hit that wave in the same way that all of these bands that were releasing albums, especially on Solid State, they were releasing albums at the same time, and I thought were just as talented, but they just didn't quite make it as big. But that's Inhale, Exhale.
Oh
yeah, that's a
They're
good one.
they're
Mason.
just
My mom likes
under,
that band.
at least on Spotify, they're just under 10,000 monthly listeners. But if you listen to their stuff, I mean, they were just as heavy as like an August Burns Red. They had just the poppy elements, the songwriting that was poppy enough that you would hear in like They're Only Chasing Safety from Underoath. Just they hit all of these things, and it's like, how weren't they as big as an Underoath or as big as an Attack Attack or as big as Devil Wears Prada? Like that never made much sense to me because they had all of the talent as any one of those bands. And I think the songwriting was just as good as any one of those bands, but for whatever reason, they just didn't make it as big. So anyway, I think Inhale, Exhale, I still remember listening to them when I was in middle school and high school and thinking they are so good. And even at the time I was thinking they are so criminally underrated in comparison to all their contemporaries, even on the Solid State label.
Yeah. Yeah. They really had it going on. They had a lot of like those poppy kind of chorus kind of situations. And then they went heavy, you know, they really had that Underoath vibe. Without being under oath, without the baggage that is under oath.
This is,
Do you think-
I tried to talk myself into counting this band, but I was like, it's such a big Spotify number. I should have just gone for it.
Is that right? Is that
Really?
Do you think like that's why they're underrated? It's because they were too much like Underoath to be like they're like Underoath light. It's this is Underoath, just a lighter version of it.
It may be, but every band was like that, right? I mean, people said that that As Cities Burn was under oath light as well.
Right.
You know,
if Inhale, Exhale, let's say they had like even 50,000 monthly listeners on Spotify right now, I don't think I would have picked them. But the fact that they're under 10,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, to me, it's like, and then their contemporaries like Underoath are over 1 million. You know, certainly August Burns Red's over 1 million. I would imagine some of those other bands I just mentioned too, like Attack Attack and Devil Wears Prada, they're probably over 1 million monthly listeners. And this band has less than 10,000. And this band was literally playing for them, you know, probably at the same time where they may be even selling as many albums. Maybe not quite as much, but like to me, they were just as talented. They were so good, and they should have been bigger, I think. So I think of them as underrated in the fact that they should have been as big as an Underoath, or they should have been as big as an Attack Attack, but they just aren't.
Mason, I want to have an argument against you, but I don't have one. Like that's just a good pick.
Great. I'm all about that. Whenever I can leave you speechless. All right, is it my turn again now for current bands?
It's your turn
current
again.
band.
Okay, I'm really actually
2014 to present.
I'm very excited by the fact that I get to have a current band as a first pick. I'm gonna go with a band that let me look up their monthly listener on Spotify. You know, given the fact that like Spotify numbers are going to be way different from like a band that was only released one album in like 1995 versus a band that we think is underrated but is releasing stuff in 2010s and 2020s. This band I think is criminally underrated in the sense that, again, they don't have a lot of monthly listeners, but they are extremely talented. Maybe one of the most creative bands on the roster of Solid State right now. And nobody like seems to like recognize that, but that's the ongoing concept. We interviewed them last year with their new album Cullen, but they are as creative as any band that has ever been on Solid State, and that includes my favorite band of all time, like the Chariot, which I think is maybe one of the most creative bands I've ever heard. But the ongoing concept is just as creative as any band you'll ever hear. They're just as talented, and yet they have less than 15,000 monthly listeners on Spotify.
Yeah, that's
and
wild
and
to
they're
me.
contemporary. I mean, you like think of like the current bands that are on Solid State right now. Like you've got Silent Planet, which I think is about 500,000 monthly listeners right now. You've got Fit for a King, that's probably close to 1 million even. You've got Norma Jean, which is probably 250,000 monthly listeners. So you've got some really big bands that are like on the current roster as well, and ongoing concept doesn't even come close to those numbers. So I think they're just as talented as any of those bands, and I love all those other bands. But all those bands have the popularity that you would expect from the creativity and talent of those bands. But the ongoing concept doesn't have the popularity as some of those other bands. So I'm going to take them as my contemporary round pick.
Yeah, ongoing concept. I think maybe the reason that they didn't quite get that push, right? That cult status that we often find in the solid state realm is because they were in that period of death in the genre.
Yeah, like their first album from on
everyone-
Solid State was 2013, which is like
Oh.
that's why I like create the like 2013
Oh,
or
no.
2014. That's like where this
Yeah.
era starts, because there was just like a death in the general music scene, but especially for Solid
it
State.
was yeah, it was like it was the doldrums of the genre. Everyone was doing an exodus away. They're like, all right, enough of this cookie cutter BS. And the ongoing concept is nothing like a cookie cutter band.
Right.
But because so many fans turned their back on that scene, I think that they were kind of left in the dust for that reason. I also think that maybe like they had a couple really, really good songs on those first couple albums. They had a couple fillers though as well.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe hurt them a little bit. But in terms of like a band that was like super DIY and really like focused on making the best music that they possibly could at the moment, I think that they are definitely underrated.
Great. I'm glad that you continue to
Yeah.
approve my picks, Colin. That doesn't happen very
Yeah.
often.
Yeah, it is what it is. Got to give you the wins when you
I
get them.
guess so. All right, is it your turn?
It is my turn. Okay, so this one I was fumbling around with quite a bit because there's a lot to choose from right now. There's a lot of really great bands that aren't getting enough recognition in this scene, especially in the solid state realm. But I'm going to pick a friend of ours, a really good friend of ours, who's been on the podcast just about more than anybody else, and that is The Undertaking.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I
Those the
think
homies.
Mason, you talked about just a little bit ago that you think the Chariot's one of the most creative bands that you've ever listened to, and I would agree with that. I think The Undertaking is cut from that same cloth, and they deserve that same kind of recognition. They're great songwriters, they're great people, they're great performers. They like to play around with weird time signatures. They like to do things a little against the grain, which I appreciate significantly. And I think that every single time that they do something, it's something interesting and new and fresh and desirable. But for some reason, it's not quite hitting into that next echelon of listenership yet.
I mean, I don't disagree. Yeah, they're probably, I don't even know, maybe a couple thousand monthly listeners on Spotify, and certainly I'm one of them.
Yeah.
They are extremely talented and creative, and I think you're totally right. I don't understand why they aren't as big, especially when you see bands like the Callous Cowboys get really big right now with that kind of creative chaos. And it's like, or especially obviously you've got like the lasting power of Dillinger Escape Plan, but you're now seeing like Better Lovers kind of get steam in that world too. It's like, how is the Undertaking not getting that same kind of steam? I mean, they were, if I wasn't picking the ongoing concept, I would have picked the Undertaking. So I think
They
it's
put
great
on a
pick.
great live show. Like a band that get the photograph. Like those guys are so cool to photograph. Like there's high energy show. Like they're jumping up their crowd. So like it's a full experience to see them live. So if you haven't seen them, please go see them. buy a shirt or something. Help our guys out.
Buy the records
Yeah,
too.
buy
Yeah.
the records.
Good. All right, Jason.
I had two I was debating for tops in this round. Undertaking was one of mine. I just like that whole Chariot Cowboys. I don't even know if you whatever subgenre you call that, but yeah, I love all that stuff. I feel good instead about going with Spirit Breaker.
Ooh.
Oh yes,
yeah.
this was also on my
Mm.
list. I almost did
So
this one.
good.
Only a couple thousand listeners, which is crazy because not in 2021. To me, it sort of feels like, and this isn't a diss or a slight or anything. I'm picking them. Obviously, I like them. It sort of feels like 2010s Under Oath. That feels like they take a lot of that core sound and build on it in creative ways, and they have a lot of sounds to them. And honestly, I'm wherever they take this.
Yeah, dude, their singer is an absolute monster. He can do absolutely everything vocally. There's nothing he can't do. And he's got dreads that, at least at the time we talked to him, that rivaled Justin's.
Yeah, he has some sick dreads. I love any vocalist with dreads. Anyway, if your band has dreads in them, I might just like them. Just
Big Pillar fan.
when I was young, I got to say they were good. They had no staying power with me. Flash in the pan.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right.
All right, great pick.
Great pick,
Justin, right?
Yeah, Azusa. For solid state, the most progressive. It's like they have a female vocalist. They have guitar players and people from like Extol and Dillinger. So in that we're kind of chaotic, but with her voice is very melodic. For me, that was on my list. Like if Noah picked Azusa, I was like Azusa's the band. And if you they're like the song "Heavy Yoke" is just brutal, and then she'll just sing over top of it back into this brutality. And they should be bigger because Spirit Box. Well, they're a little heavier than Spirit Box, but it's the same. We have bands Slow Pulse, like this kind of female fronted heavy band. I'm surprised they're not bigger because they have a female vocalist, heavy music, and just the litany of energy and the kind of death metal world. They cap. They're just as good as any other death metal band with that kind of soft vocal intertwined with the music that they do. So they're criminally underrated.
Yeah,
I
agree.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I do think it's kind of interesting. I'm curious, did you all have those bands, all four of those bands on your potential list? Were they in your top 5 Rolodex for what you might put down for your 2014 to present bands?
Like Undertaking and
Ongoing
Azusa
Concept.
and
Ongoing Concept, Undertaking, Spirit Breaker. Spirit Breaker and
like we all had the same.
Yeah. Yeah, because I had all 4 of those bands in my potential. Did we all have them?
No,
I mean, I was gonna
didn't.
have Spirit Breaker and
mine's
Azusa. Certainly.
Yeah, mine's different. Yeah. I'll pick from bands I really love, and then as well just whittling away on my list. Spirit Breaker, because those boys is heavy.
Yeah. Dude, I love that.
I mean, there are obviously you get some of those legacy bands that are on the Solid State roster right now, but people are missing out on some of these smaller bands. There's just so many of them right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we could literally go through the entire roster right now. We could say every single one of these deserves to be considered underrated. Right?
Yeah. Solid State, it's a weird thing that now they would be considered an underrated label. But 15 years ago when I'm in junior high school, in high school, that's the label. If you have any band that's playing a youth group, you're like, oh my gosh, I got to get signed to either Solid State or Face Down. That was it. There was no other thing they were trying to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I almost think it begs the question of why are there so many bands for Solid State right now that are considered underrated?
I mean, they seem to be signing bands that, they probably don't have quite the numbers quite yet, but they see clearly creative potential, and they're like, we'll give them some money and see what happens with it. And if it doesn't work out, doesn't work out. And if it does, great. Like, but it seems like kind of these like low risk kind of bands, partly because these bands are so talented and creative, like it could pop off. You don't know. And
It
they're
feels like,
probably
to some
really like
extent-
reeling off of the fact that they've got bands like Devil Wears Prada and Fit for a King that are probably making them pretty good money.
Sure.
And I guess it feels like the
What were you
genre
gonna
as
say,
a
Jason?
whole is a bit more niche than it used to be without like Under Oath and others at the forefront. That
Yeah. Yeah, I almost kind of feel like these are like the cred bands almost, you know?
Right.
Like you could pull up any kind of a heavy music listener and be like, "Hey, check these guys out."
Oh yeah.
And they would not be put off even if like they were like evangelical Christian, right? Like they would not be put off by these bands because they're all fantastic.
Right. If we were to do this podcast 15 years ago and
Oh
we
my
did this
God.
category, we would be saying like the Chariot is this kind of like they would fit this category of like a band that is super underrated. That's a current solid state band. Like that's that kind of band. And so when we think of those bands now, it's the Undertaking, it's the Spirit Breakers, it's the Azusa. Like, yeah, that's exactly who we're thinking of. But yeah, the Chariot 15 years ago would have been that band for this kind of category.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
I think so.
So, wild
Sick.
card round. So any band from any era. So this will be our last round. Any band from any era. I think we're starting back with Justin, right?
Okay. Any band from any era. Okay. I'm going with Becoming the Archetype.
Ooh.
For me,
Okay, interesting.
they're underrated. Okay.
This is
Even though they played Furnace Fest, right? You know,
well, so did the Undertaking.
yeah,
so,
it's
yeah.
okay. So the Undertaking played Furnace Fest. Like for me, Becoming the Archetypes underrated, both within like the Christian metal world and the broader like sales world. Like Jason Wisdom, like he's still like a teacher. Like he didn't make enough
Yeah.
money to leave the day job behind. So for me, that they're underrated because like every album they put out is just killer. They just
Yeah.
kill. Like even when Jason leaves the band, that one weird album when pretty much no originals is that album's heavy, and the next album they put it super heavy. I think that they're underrated to me. I'm like, I tell people about them all the time. Like, oh, I never heard of this band. I'm like, they've been around since I was like in junior high. So for me, they've been around such a long time, and they just never got like the accolades that I thought that they would get. Y'all might disagree, but I feel like they should have been like another tier. They should have got like to be opening up for like Lamb of God and bands like that. They never kind of broke out in that way.
Yeah, for a band that has a sound like them, I always imagine that they would have broken out a little bit more. I think in terms of the label, they're probably not underrated. I think in terms of just like the label roster, I think they would be up there with like the top probably 10.
Okay.
In terms of the entire history of the label.
Okay.
So maybe in terms of the label, they're not underrated, but in terms of like the wider listening audience, I think 100% that is an underrated pick.
Yeah, that would be my critique too. Is I think they probably where their listenership is right now, even where it was back then, they probably fit within that like second or third tier of the bands that were on the roster at the time, and they were right there, and they probably had the sales of what that should have been, and they kind of fit that. And even currently, I think that it looks like they're just at like 25,000, just under 25,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. That sort of is where I would expect them to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right, Cullen. Like in terms of the broader metal community, it's kind of unbelievable they never were able to like really break out as at least bigger. Like I feel like they are a band that at least deserves like 100,000 monthly listeners, I think.
For sure. Well, and you said something like they've always been like a second tier solid state band. Like if you're like you take the broader bands, if under like they were never like the front line. Like this is the top band that solid state was pushing. They were never that band.
Yeah,
it should have been, but
we will all blame Seth Heckhox for
that's right. Fucking
Yeah.
socialist.
It's always his fault. God damn it.
All right, Jason, what is your wild card pick?
So Menu with 280 listeners on Spotify per month.
Whoa.
Another
I saw
one
that.
album
Right.
band too, right?
One album. I saw them at a county fair. They had a DJ who had the crowd moshing to the dungeon theme from Mario Brothers.
Is that da 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 da
Yes.
da 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 da?
Disqualify this pick because this band is ludicrous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is a different band.
It is a different
technically.
band.
Name, a totally different sound. They sounded
That's
kind
very
of
true.
like the
They were
Deftones, a different
straight up
lineup
new
and
metal.
everything.
Yeah.
And they
but
did have an album on Solid State.
They had
Yeah.
an album on Solid State.
Yeah.
It's not bad. It's kind of new metal-y, but it's not bad.
Throwing Myself, very good. I think it's a very good album,
Yeah.
actually. I love the Seahorse.
I mean, I loved it at the time. I go back now and I'm like, yeah, it's sure holds up fine.
yeah.
If that was disqualified, I'd probably try to sneak in Strong Arm.
Oh,
But,
Ooh. Yeah, I don't think that would count. That's a cult classic,
Dude.
you know. That's
I know. It's
yeah.
that's a tricky one because like not many people listen to it. But Furnace Fest 2 years ago when they played that when
Yeah.
Further played a Strong Arm song, and it was like 50% of the crowd lost their minds. I'm like, I know every single one of these words, and 50% was like, what is happening? So, like, I think I'll take the point because everyone who rates it maximally.
Yeah.
They put all their weight behind it. Like this.
Yes. Ranked choice voting.
Jason, Ludacris was a band that I was like really, I'm like, do they qualify? Do they not? So I don't think they're like as clear cut, partly because of the Norma Jean connection, but you do have a point to be made. It was its own band with its own sound, and they had their own album. Like it wasn't the same exact band as obviously like Bless the Martyr. So I think you have a point to be made there, but also it was like one of those like, do they qualify? Do they not? So, but I do think they were underrated in the sense that like, yeah, the fact that they have only 250 monthly listeners, that's kind of unbelievable. And the fact that, put it in context, like new metal, when did Throwing Myself come out? 97, 98?
99.
A little later than that.
Like
Yeah.
that was,
It was like,
yeah, I mean that is like the golden years of new metal, and the fact that now I understand it's like heavier new metal than like Hybrid Theory and some of the other big new metal stuff that was coming out at the time, but the fact that like that didn't get quite as big, even as like a heavier new metal sound, it's still kind of unbelievable that they only have that many monthly listeners, especially with the Norma Jean connection.
the sound of that album honestly makes more sense in hindsight. Like seeing where the greater Skagen universe, Chariot, Norma Jean, where all these bands sort of have access this whole range of sounds from like metal to rock, and you have
Right.
this, this band you could just Ludacris, you could just slot it somewhere within that range,
I like the way you said it. Ludicrous.
We changed it because it's the same name as Ludacris the rapper, so like you feel like you have to
Right.
Yeah.
pronounce it
Yeah.
differently.
Well, he wasn't out yet, technically, right? I
I
thought it
think
was
he,
like
he wasn't
Ludacris?
big
He
yet,
was
but
a
he was
local-
he was
but
doing
out.
his thing.
Yeah.
He was a local
Okay.
DJ who was starting a rap career. He was
Gotcha.
going by Chris Lover, and he changed his name to Ludacris the Rapper, and they were like, "Oh, great, we're changing our name."
Yeah, I was gonna say if you're so obscure that that you have to change your name because of some upcoming rapper, you're probably under.
There we
That's
go,
a
yes.
great point. That's your best argument
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, they could have bullied like they could have made Ludacris change his name. It's like, no, you know what? We are here first. Ludacris, you change
Yeah.
your name. That's what they should have done.
It's funny because they're like from the same area. I wonder if there was some cross pollination there. Maybe Ludacris, Luda. I wonder if he went to a Ludacris concert and was like, this is great.
They did have a DJ.
I gotta
why
cash
not?
in on this.
Yeah. All right, Cullen.
All
what's
right.
your wild card pick?
This one I was struggling with because there's a lot I want to pick, but there's one band that all of a sudden rose to the surface. The cream came to the top, as one might say. Mason, don't take that the wrong way. I know you're about to.
Ooh.
Once Nothing.
Oh.
I think This is one
Gosh.
band that I listen to religiously in art class, especially. They have that one album with like
Oh, Southern
the
blue collar metal.
yeah no what's the one with the
First came the law, then came grace.
yeah, which one's that?
Let me look really quick.
I'm
It
trying
is
to look. First Came the Law.
Mhm.
Yeah, First Came the Law 2008. It was their only full-length album. I didn't know that. That I thought they had another album.
how
I
They-
didn't know.
supposedly they have like 5 EPs, and how is it possible to
Yeah.
have 5 EPs but
Yep.
only one full length?
Well, it's
Yeah.
like they put out a lot of EPs. Like Earth Mover, the one that comes out right before, right before like First Comes the Law, and then they put out 2. Like they just tease everyone with the Indiana sessions. And I messaged them on Instagram, said, "Hey, are y'all gonna play Furniture?" It's like, what the heck are y'all doing? But Once Nothing, just great pick,
Yeah,
great pick.
dude. I think that I don't know what happened to them. Like they got lost in the shuffle. They had an unabashed Southern metal sound,
Which is funny because they were from
had
Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah,
yeah, which
it's-
is wild.
it's a rule up there. You know, it's country. They're hard work.
Yeah, that's right.
Work with their hands, people.
Pittsburgh and Birmingham are the same place.
That's right.
Yeah, well, they're both steel cities. It makes sense. They had so many cool one-liners that I just found myself repeating over and over again. Almost like the Chariot, right? Like there's a lot of Chariot lines that I would repeat over and over. There was a lot of Once Nothing lines that I would repeat over and over. And I think even if it was just for And Then Came the Law, that last song on that record, or no, And Then Came Grace. That's the last song. If it was just for that song, they would make my underrated list because that song is a masterpiece and there's hardly anything going on with it, but they did it so tastefully.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you guys remember, I think it was like 2013, 14 maybe. They like had like this big Kickstarter about how they were going to get back together, and like it didn't go anywhere. Like I don't think that they got more than like a couple $100 in the Kickstarter, and then they were like, well, I guess we're not gonna release another
Well, I
album.
guess we're underrated.
Yeah.
So underrated, I mean, that is like the definition of it. You can't even get like a Kickstarter going, which it seems like everyone can get a Kickstarter figured out for
It's like
any
the
band.
opposite of what Caedmon's Call had to do.
Yeah. Yeah, for real. So it's a band that I would love to hear more music from, but I don't think we're ever going to get it.
Yeah, that's a band that I had on my list as. I mean, they for sure fit the definition of underrated. I also think they're really good. So, no arguments here. I would have for sure picked them.
So,
I wonder what.
all
Here,
right,
let me look
Mason.
really quick. I wonder what their monthly listener. I bet they've got to be under 1,000 monthly listeners on Spotify.
I'm one of those 1,000 listeners. Like I'm just pushing the numbers.
Oh, they're
I'll be
at
honest-
1,300. That's more than I thought. I thought
Whoa.
they'd be
Going
closer
up.
to like 500, but they're at 1,300.
They talk about doing like a reunion show. I was like, maybe this will like be a little inspiration, you know?
It says
That'd be
in
nice.
2022 they did a reunion show.
They did.
What?
Yeah, Pittsburgh. Yep.
In 2022 the band announced a party time reunion show being held at the Penn Brewery on January 28th. So
What the hell?
I don't know if they actually did that or not, but supposedly.
I love every one of these Wikipedia pages. The final section is like, and that's it.
Right.
I want to know who writes all these.
Right.
Like
Who's writing solid state band write-ups?
Every band that was on a Christian label, there's a section that's like, we're Christians in a band, but you know that whole, there's like 15
Yeah, but
years
we're
of them
not-
arguing with
we're
themselves
not a
whether they're
Christian band.
Christians, and then it ends with, and then they played once at Furnace Fest, and that was it.
Yeah.
The other thing you always hear is we don't want to put God in a box.
Right. But they
We're just
did
being
play
all
that
things to
show
all people.
on their Instagram. So
And
I checked Once Nothing Instagram, and they did play their pictures. They actually did it at the brewery.
Oh my gosh.
Damn.
We got to get Once Nothing on here.
Please
That's true.
do.
That's true.
Please do.
My favorite Spotify like Christian metal band, or sorry, my favorite Wikipedia page for a Christian metal band is Demon Hunter, because it's like, history, band members, and then
The
there's a
troops.
section that says
Killed them
reported
in-
use by military.
Yeah. Killing Bin Laden.
Yeah.
They were listening to Demon Hunter while they killed Bin Laden.
All right, my pick. I was thinking either going like by what I think truly is the most underrated, but there's also like a nostalgic band that I'm thinking of that I think also for sure is underrated, but they're just like they were one of the first heavy bands I ever listened to, so it's like hard to not pick them. So I'm gonna go with them. But that's Life in Your Way.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna pick them.
They had, I
knew
think,
it.
just one album on Solid State. They had a couple albums that I actually like more. From, I think it was like Indianola, or I don't know how to say the record label, but they had a couple other albums. I think they were even on Floodgate Records for one album. But I really really loved Life at Your Way. I do think like if Life in Your Way was able to create that sound now, they very well could be a big band, like that kind of like melodic hardcore where you get the like heavy elements, but you got like the singing stuff. They just, you see like bands like Dayseeker and a lot of the other big metalcore bands right now that like obviously balance that, and even that was big back in the early 2000s. But it's kind of hard to believe that Life in Your Way didn't really take off in the same way that a lot of those other bands have. And so, yeah, I think Life in Your Way, I think of bands like It Dies Today, where that's kind of that melodic hardcore stuff. I'm like, how was Life in Your Way not as big as It Dies Today? Or, those are some of the bands I think of. And I'm like, they just should have been just as big. But they never quite made it as big for whatever reason. And so, anyway, I think they fit the category of underrated. I think they're like around like 7,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, something like that. So I think they certainly fit the category, and I think they're just really freaking talented. They're really good.
I think argumentatively, I agree with you, Mason. They're very talented. They're pretty good. If they do a limited release vinyl at Furnace Fest, then they're definitely probably not actually underrated.
Yeah, I
They
mean,
played Furnace Fest, and there were lots of people.
And
Lots of
they
stage
sold a
diving.
whole bunch of vinyl there.
yeah, they did.
So,
I mean,
Lots of stage dives.
you
Lots of
are
stage
right. I
dives.
mean, but that probably, like, here's what I will say. Those are probably literally their only fans, and they happen to all show up at the shed that day and bought all of
You're
their
probably
vinyl.
right.
But that's it. That's
Yeah, you're probably
there's
right.
no other fans other than those people that showed up.
Yeah, that's probably right.
So that would be my counter argument. So, Life in Your Way. All right. Let's before we, Cullen, should we do our like name our bands, and people can, maybe listeners can like figure out who they think might have the best team assembled?
Yeah, let's do that first. You go first.
All right, so I picked, I have to go back now, Training for Utopia for my beginning era. Then I picked Inhale Exhale as the golden era band. And then for the current era, I picked The Ongoing Concept. And then for my wild card, I picked Life in Your Way. So that's my roster of bands. And I think I've got a pretty good roster. I don't know if it's the best, but I think it's pretty good.
Right, because mine is the best, which is Still Breathing, The Ascendicate, The Undertaking, and Once Nothing. Jason, do you remember yours? Do you need me to read them for you?
I have Society's Finest. I have Gwen Stacy, who I would happily trade for anyone from any other era. I have Spirit Breaker, and I have Ludacris.
You might have had a third round bust there, or second round
Yeah,
bust. I
they
should
can't all
say.
be winners.
So then,
Not the first time you've busted in the second round.
Wow.
oh,
Ooh.
wow.
At least he made it
youth
there.
That's
Yo.
true.
veteran,
Hey, not a lot of Christian men can say they made it to that.
Maybe it was second base instead of second
Yo,
round.
you can't.
I know what you meant.
All right, Justin, what's your roster?
Oh, so I probably have the heaviest roster so far, hands down.
Yeah, you definitely do.
Just got NIV, then the Famine, Azusa, and BTA become the archetype. It's clearly, just brutality, start to finish. However you want to line this up, I feel lots of mosh happening, lots of violence.
Yeah, lots of like squat PRs happening with your music.
Oh, we're lots of games. I feel like the merch is all lots of black merch, lots of skulls.
I will say, you're right with that, Mason, because Becoming the Archetype was often my PR personal record throwing music for track and field. So makes
I
sense.
mean, hey, at least
This is
Jason Wisdom
CrossFit
has done
music.
something with his life. He's helped you PR.
That's right.
All right, should we mention
Sure.
some honorable mentions? I can think of
Oh.
a number of bands that should have been mentioned but weren't. But does anybody else have any honorable mentions that they can think of that, at least they at least deserve a shout out?
Can we shout them out?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, shout them
Oh,
out now.
it's the showdown.
The showdown, yeah, for sure.
They're so even. I feel like they got super underrated because they changed their sound. Like that
Right.
first '08 album, like that one's just crazy heavy, death metal influence, and then they become like bikers. They get to this biker
Yeah.
metal, like Blood and the Gears and everything like that. But I think
I continue to contend that Man Named Hell is the greatest intro song to any album ever.
for sure. But I think for me they're underrated because as that sound kind of shifts and they kind of go away, I think they went away at the wrong time. I think if they
Yeah.
put one more album out, then they break through. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like y'all changed the sound, y'all developed it. They kind of got that dirty southern, like kind of gritty, a little singing, but still like heavy enough to kind of drive things along. And then they just stop. It's like, oh, what have y'all done? And then they came back at Furnace Fest. But playing Furnace Fest shouldn't count because everybody plays Furnace Fest. That's been anything at any time. So
The Wiggles haven't. I'm waiting for the Wiggles to play Furnace
dude,
Fest.
kids will get beat up, knocked out during the Wiggles. Better watch out,
Dude.
Cardi
That would be so wild, though.
Do you imagine that kids' mosh area?
There should be a band like a kids metal band called the Squiggles or something like that, and it's literally just kids moshing. I would watch that so
I want to
happily.
see kids trying to catch other kids stage diving.
Oh, that's great.
Let's just put like
Yeah.
a big puffy that they can jump onto and bounce off of.
Yeah, bouncy house.
Yeah.
In the bouncy house.
Bounce house mosh pit.
Yeah.
Kids moshing in the bouncy
Yeah,
house.
reduce
Got
that
roundhouse
injury risk.
kicks going on, everything. Yeah. Got little kids with like backpacks and they've got like little like water dispensers in their mouth while they're doing it. I mean, it'd be perfect.
Oh,
It'd
yeah.
be perfect. Any others you want to shout out there, Justin?
Dude, so for me, well, the other bands don't really technically count, but so some of the new bands I would kind of throw in there would be that I've started like listening to because of the podcast. One's called Opponent. They're kind of
Yes.
that newer, on that super heavy death metal kind of vibe. So for me, it's like
I think they are also disciples of Demon Hunter.
yeah,
as
very
you
much
were.
yeah.
so.
So I'm shout out to the to the DH. So for me, like
Go get your hot dog orator, everyone, by the way.
So they're underrated and that kind of I hadn't heard of them until I got the assignment. Oh, let me put these guys on. I turned into them, and they're just killing, just
They're brutal.
just heavy. So in the heavy world, I think they're underrated for me.
Love it.
Yeah.
Jason, what are some of your honorable mentions?
So here's a couple of very old bands. Few Left Standing. Most people remember them
Oh.
as a Take Hold band, but Solid State
Yeah.
did re-release their albums, so I considered
Yeah.
it very ancient metalcore band that was like absolute blast from the past. I remember all of this. The other that I thought was interesting, I didn't really consider because it's not really my genre. So late 90s, one record label has two Swedish Christian post-hardcore bands, which sounds like, why are there two of those in the world? Why does one label have both of them? Blindside went on to be huge. They were on tour with POD and everything. Self-Minded currently has 225 listeners on Spotify. And I went and back and listened to Self-Minded, and I'm like, I think I like this more than Blindside.
Wow.
That's sacrilegious.
Whoa.
Wow. Whoa.
I'm not a
Oh,
huge.
that is
I've never been a
sacrilegious.
huge Blindside fan for whatever reason. I think
Oh, that's
man.
one of my
people
all-time
love them,
favorite
but,
bands,
like,
dude.
I was
You're talking to
crying.
the wrong crowd.
Doing the set. I'm in the back behind, just weeping.
I was in the third row, bawling my eyes out. I also got to sing with Christian Langskog during that
is true.
set. It was awesome.
It looks like
but
Oli
no.
actually played guitar in
Yeah.
2002 for Self-Minded for
I was just gonna say
one or
Oli-
two shows.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, that's great. That's a good pick. for me, it would be Lightworker. That's one that I think deserves a little bit more respect, a little more time. Oh man, all of a sudden I just blanked. I had a whole bunch. The Drowned God.
Oh, yeah, I was
Also-
going to mention them
I'm
too.
also wearing it right now. I think they're just like dirty and crazy and nasty and like, oh man, they just get my rocks off onto them. You know what I mean by that. And then I forgot what else I was gonna say. There's a whole bunch of other bands, but anyways, Mason, go ahead.
I was going to mention Drowned God, but in terms of golden
Far
era,
Less was the other one I was thinking.
Oh
of.
yeah.
in terms of
Yeah.
golden era, I was going to mention Sever Your Ties. They have 600 monthly listeners on Spotify, but I think they were so criminally underrated. I don't know how they weren't bigger. And then in terms of early stuff, this sort of doesn't count, but maybe I could see why there would be arguments against. But Beloved, I think, should have been one of the biggest heavy metal
Yes.
band or like metal bands and post-hardcore
Yes.
bands. They were
True.
coming around at the time that sound was becoming big, and they released the one album and broke up. And I still to this day think if they would have just put out a couple more albums, they would have been just as big as Under Oath. I really do think that.
Yeah.
I think they were just as talented. They were just as good in terms of songwriting. They were so good. So I sort of think of them underrated in that sense, but they also were like, they were appropriately rated at the time with Solid State. But looking back now, retroactively, I think they were really underrated. So
Yeah.
anyway, great picks, guys. It's so much fun to reminisce, not just about Solid State in general, but specifically bands that a lot of people maybe who even grew up with Solid State bands or in the Solid State world may not even really remember, or they never listened to at all. There's certainly a few bands that you guys mentioned that I had never even thought of or heard of before. So I'm excited to check some of those bands out. So if you're a Solid State fan and there's some bands where you're like, hey, I haven't heard that band in forever, or I haven't listened to them ever, check them out. There's still really good stuff in the entire Solid State catalog. So, so much fun to reminisce. Thank you guys so much. Check out Justin's work. We'll make sure there's links for that. Check out Jason's book and help out the Trevor Project as soon as you can to get that out. And we're just super, super grateful. And we'll have to get you guys some other time on the podcast, and we'll chat about some other music that you guys are into.
Thanks for having us on, man. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, all. Very fun.
Yeah, thank you guys. You guys are great.